Thanks for coming, everyone, and to our online guests, thanks for coming. I'm just going to go through a quick bit of housekeeping before we introduce our speaker. Just so everyone knows, there's like, audio around the room. So while the presentation's on, if we could be quiet, just because obviously we're recording it, so we don't want that just going over the recording. And same with our online guests. If you're able to mute your speakers, that'd be great. I just want to start by an acknowledgement of country. I wish to pay my respects to the Larrakia people who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands in which we meet today. I also acknowledge all First Nations people across the lands in which we live and work and pay my respects to elders both past and present. For those of you who get the talk during the presentation, if you just go outside this door, they're just outside this first flight, in case of emergency, just the same way you came in, we'll just go down the stairs and out to the oval. And I think that's it for me. So I'll bring up Harva to our introduction today for our speaker, if you want to come up.
Yep. Thanks.
Take it away.
Thank you. I'm really excited that Professor Sarah Snyder is here today. And I'll just warn you that she arrived yesterday from the US. So she might be a little tired. I would be a little tired. So I met Sarah in 2011 when I started my PhD. She was a couple years ahead of me at the University of Nevada in Reno as a PhD student there. And we were in the same lab and working on the same species, but different questions. So we quickly became friends and collaborators. And she's helped me quite a bit wandering around in Texas, looking for tortoises, and I've helped her a little bit in Montserrat, and it's been fun. A couple years before she finished her PhD, she got into teaching, and that helped her get a professorship straight out of her PhD. And she's been at Bard College at Simon's Rock for the last decade, a little over a decade, where she's worked on opening up this field station that's associated with the college in Montserrat. I could tell a lot of stories, but I might just let you go. Yeah, so thanks, Sarah.
All right. Well, thanks, Hava, for having me. Thank you all for coming. This is very exciting for me. I've never been to Australia, so I'm very thrilled to be here. And so this talk I'm going to give after the volcano, building a field station in Montserrat in the West Indies, is a little different than a traditional kind of research talk I would normally give. So I guess I need to look where to click. I thought to click and work. Maybe I screwed it up. Now we're good.
Yeah.
Sorry. So kind of just a brief outline of where we're going in this talk. It's just going to give you a little more introduction to who I am and what I do, and then give you a little overview of the natural history of Montserrat, in case you don't know anything about it, which I didn't until I went there. And then a few research highlights of some work I've been doing and some of my colleagues have been doing. And then finally, I'll talk more about this field station that we put together. So, like Hava said, I started my academic career in the Western US, over there, at the University of Nevada in Reno, and I was studying desert tortoises and the effects of wildfire on their thermal biology. And from there, I went across the country back to the Northeast. So I was in desert habitat, and then I transitioned into deciduous temperate habitats. But I continued to study reptiles and amphibians. So my work's kind of a combination, I would say, of herpetology, ecology, and conservation, at the intersection of those three fields. And so most of my research since going to Massachusetts, so I teach at a small liberal arts university with undergraduate students. And so a lot of my research is trying to get students involved with that work. So just a couple things I've done. I've been involved with the student network for amphibian pathogen surveillance, so looking for early detection of pathogens in salamanders, since we have a huge salamander diversity in the US. And then I've also done various projects with the Ecological Research for Education Network, including studying the impacts of climate change on amphibian breeding and things like that. So I've kind of done several different different things since being in Massachusetts. And then from there, I had this kind of unique opportunity to start doing some work in the tropics, which I had never really done anything in the tropics before. One of my colleagues at the college or university had actually had a job opportunity at the small island in the Caribbean, which fell through, but he decided that it would be a great place to take students on a field course type program. And so every year since then, since about 2014, we've been taking students down on either a short 3 or 4 week field course, or it's kind of morphed into a larger semester, half semester course. And it's been a really interesting way to get students to experience a totally different habitat and totally different ecology than where they're coming from in Massachusetts. So talk more about that. Okay, so second section, right? Natural history of Montserrat. So I don't know if you guys know where Montserrat is, but if you don't, it is in the Caribbean. So at the top, we have Florida, bottom, South America, and then the island arc of the Lesser Antilles. Montserrat's in red. So it's a really small island among many islands. And it is a British overseas territory. So it's 102 kilometers squared, so it's pretty small. But it does have a pretty big elevational range. So we go from sea level all the way up to 1,000 meters. The population originally, like before this volcanic event, was around, I think, 15,000. Since then, it's been reduced to over 4,000 because most people left the island and haven't come back. Only the top third above that dashed line of the island is currently inhabited by people. The lower 2/3 are off limits due to it being dangerous because of the volcano. So a lot of the population center was originally actually in the south of the island, and since then everything is shifted to the north of the island. It is English speaking, so the island was originally inhabited by Amerindian people, and then Europeans came over, and enslaved people came over, and it was originally settled by the Irish. So there's a lot of Irish influence on the island, which is kind of strange. So it's actually called the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean. St. Patrick's Day is their biggest holiday of the year. So it's culturally very interesting. But it's a really small community. And because it's so small and it's English speaking and it's really safe in many ways, there's very low crime. And also there are really no dangerous animals, just there's a couple dangerous plants. But basically it's a really safe place to be. So it's easy for you to take students, and it's relatively accessible. Okay, so how is it formed? So the reason the island is there is due to island arc volcanism. So if you look at the dotted line on the right, the Atlantic, the two tectonic plates come together in that region. So the Atlantic plate subducts or goes under the Caribbean plate, and as that plate is melting, it causes volcanic activity. So all those islands were formed from that phenomenon. And the island is, the rocks on the island are primarily andesite. It's formed from basalt from the ocean floor and sediments that accumulate. And because of the way these volcanoes form, they're at a lower temperature and they have more dissolved gases in them. And so the resulting volcanic activity is very explosive. And instead of, I tend to think of Hawaiian volcanoes where you have lava coming out. These volcanoes are not like that. They actually explode giant rocks and ash and gas that moves at really fast speeds down the flanks of the volcano and is at a really high temperature. So it's kind of a different type of volcano than sometimes we think of. And we call those pyroclastic eruptions. So I'll probably take pyroclastic flow or pyroclastic eruptions. That's the exploding rocks. That is what happens with these volcanoes. Okay, so Montserrat itself is about 2 million years old, and it was formed from 3 periods of volcanic activity in the past, which formed different peaks on the island. The current major volcanic activity started to occur in 1995, so that's when we first started erupting. There are 5 phases of more activity, less activity, which concluded in 2010, but it's still an active volcano. So in fact, before we went down last time, I think there were some earthquakes, which was the most activity that happened for a while. And you can still smell sulfur gases on different days, and you can see gases rising out of the volcano. So it's still active, but it's not actively exploding. And different points of time during this volcanic activity, there were major ash falls, there were these pyroclastic flows. The dome of the volcano has grown and collapsed, which causes more ash and more things to happen. And then also you get this phenomenon of lahars, which is when you get a big rain and it moves all of this ash and material down on these big rivers of mud. So all of that is occurring. But the volcano is being actively observed. It's one of the most observed volcanoes in the world by the Montserrat Volcano Observatory, which has a station on the island and puts out reports, and we work with them too on some of our research. Okay, so like I said, the southern part of the island was really the populated area. This is the former capital, Plymouth. It was totally covered by a pyroclastic flow, so that peak, the pointy thing, is the top of a cathedral spire. So you have about two to 3 stories of ash covering the entire city, which is pretty crazy. And you can go on tours and actually walk around and see this destruction, which is pretty powerful. You aren't allowed to go in that southern 2/3 without special permission. So there are entry gates, and you have to get the proper authorities to either accompany you or give you permission to do your work there. But it does provide a really interesting place to do research, because we can look at the impacts that this volcano had on the animals and plants on the island and the ecological processes in general. So we have this tropical habitat, and then on top of that, we have this really interesting natural disturbance. It's pretty unique. Okay, so looking at Montserrat's teardrop shape, and looking at it, there's really 4 peaks, but there are 3 bigger peaks. The Silver Hills in the north is the oldest, so there's been more erosion, so it's a lot shorter. The peak in the middle, Katy Hill, is the tallest accessible peak, and then the Super Hills is the name of the volcano. I guess I didn't say that. That's right in the south. And so if you were to kind of look at a cross section across that peak, you'll encounter a lot of different habitats as you move up and over the mountain. And that's because of you have winds coming in from the east that travel up the mountain, condense, and we get rainfall on the top side of the mountain, and actually on the far side of the mountain, because the mountain isn't super high, so it tends to actually fall a little bit more on the other side. And if you look from the little plane that we take to get to Montserrat, you can see the Silver Hills in the front. In the back is Katy Hill, which is, you can see, covered in clouds a lot of the time. Okay, so going from lowest elevation to highest elevation, there's a lot of habitat to explore, both for research and for students to get different experiences. So there are coral reefs, which are a totally different habitat in the marine ecosystem. There are coastal habitats, and most of these slides are from one of my botany colleagues. So they're botanists. There's all the scientific names of the plants that are there, but we get different communities, the plant communities and coastal habitats. Then in some areas, especially in the Silver Hills, we get drier habitat, and also on the eastern side of the island. So there's dry forest, scrubland, grassland, and rock outcropping. So we have cacti, sometimes pretty big, and some pretty dry habitats, which have different ecological communities. And then moving up kind of that center peak on the island, there are mesic forests, which are kind of in between moisture levels, and the plants kind of in the bottom center, is one of the endemic species on the island called privy. So there are a couple endemic plants, that and an orchid. There was a third endemic plant, but it hasn't been reported since the volcano erupted. It was in the habitat that was destroyed by the volcano. So we think it's probably no longer there. It may have been gone extinct. There's rainforest, pretty wet habitat, tree ferns, things like that. And then we also get these cloud forests on the very highest peaks with stunted vegetation, things like filmy ferns and different epiphytes. And also there are a lot of these deep ravines, which are intermittent streams called guts that are pretty humid, and so there are whole freshwater systems on the island too. They're sometimes only flowing at different times of the year. So we have those guts. So if you say gut, that's what we're talking about. And Montserrat also has a relatively large number of endemic species. It's an isolated island. We get a lot of island endemism, either just on Montserrat or things that live only in the Lesser Antilles. So top left, we have the critically endangered mountain chicken frog, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but that's one of my students getting to work with it, which is pretty cool. We have, there's an endemic anole, bottom left. Bottom center is the Montserrat galley wasp, which is a lizard that's only been sighted 11 times in a 2-hectare area. So it is super, super specialized and really cryptic and hard to find, but that's pretty cool. We have in the center the Montserrat oriole. So there is one endemic bird, that's the male, they're pretty bright. There are a couple bat species that are Lesser Antilles endemics, and some insects, including those beetles. And then finally, recently a paper came out that determined that the iguana, which we thought was the introduced green iguana, is actually a Montserrat and endemic to Montserrat in the island of Saba. So it's called the Saban black iguana. And this is just a smattering of endemics. There's more endemics than this, but there are a lot of species found on Montserrat and nowhere else, which offers some interesting opportunities, and a lot that are relatively endangered as well. Okay, so that's kind of background, putting you in your place. So of where we're talking about. So now I was going to go into some research highlights. Most of these are ongoing projects or things that we're thinking about doing. So a little more idea focused than results focused, just to give you an idea of some of the things we're doing with students. Okay, so all of these projects are really collaborations between the university I work at and both students and faculty at that university, and also a lot of organizations in Montserrat, which are really critical to make this happen. So we have the Montserrat Volcano Observatory and disaster management are really important if you want to do any work in that restricted zone. We also work with the National Trust, the Botanic Gardens, and also very close with the Department of the Environment. It does all of the environmental work. We also work with a scuba company that is responsible for doing marine conservation on the island. So they help teach some of our courses and are involved with some of our research. And then recently we teamed up with another US University, Eastern Washington University, and some faculty there to start some new directions for our research. So just want to emphasize that this is all very collaborative with both people who actually live on the island and then also some people off the island. Okay, so my first topic is about this lizard called the Montserrat ground lizard. So it is Philodictis pluvia notata, but I'll just call it the ground lizard. And it is, it's a teid. And it's really, really fast and really, really hard to catch. So, and it's an island endemic. So this species is only found in Montserrat. There are other, I want to say amoebas, they used to be amoebas, but phyllodes on different Caribbean islands, but only one in Montserrat. They are named ground lizards because they construct, you can't really see in this picture, but there are holes in the ground where they spend most of their day. They come out the hottest parts of the day, which is inconvenient for when you want to catch them and having to be exposed to hot temperatures. But they are, they have been, not been, there's virtually no scientific literature on this species. So I was really curious to find out a little bit more about them, and then also what impacts the volcano has had on this population, since it's found only in Montserrat, and we know that a lot of their habitat has been likely destroyed by the volcano. So I worked with Ava a little bit on this during my last sabbatical, and then also the botanist at Simon's Rock at the University of Oregon, Dawn McCall. And so one basic question, which is, it's very basic, but I wanted to know where are they found on the island, and also what's their habitat. So I spent a lot of the time during the sabbatical constructing transects across the island, different habitats, and sampling their abundance. And then also I was able to get permission to get into this exclusion zone and sample in this the really heavily impacted volcanic area to see if they had potentially recolonized that habitat. And so I looked across a lot of different habitat types. Like I said, there are a lot of habitats in Montserrat. So here's just a sampling of some of my transects where I was looking for lizards. And what did I find out? Well, I found out they're basically habitat generalists. So I looked at several different variables, including elevation, habitat type. I didn't see a ton of specialization. So you find them at most elevations, you find them in most different habitats on the island. One place I didn't find them was on the new volcanic deposits. So it doesn't appear that they've yet colonized some of those habitats. And so that's an area I want to kind of continue to explore. I'm also interested, because they're found across lots of habitats in the northern island, but at different densities. I'm curious about how past volcanic impact has, if that's had any consequences for their population size. So despite the northern part of the island not having pyroclastic flows, it has residual of ashfall. So as the ash comes out of the volcano in the past, it's blown over and it falls in different densities across the island. So what I'm currently looking at, and that can have impacts on all different species, including insects. And I should have said they're omnivores, so they're eating insects. And insects often are impacted by ashfall. So one project that I'm currently working on is looking at how, and this is just a map showing accumulation of ash in different ashfall events, if that has had any impact on their abundance. And then I did try, Hoppy came, as she mentioned, came down to visit me, and we did try to do some movement and thermal biology with them, and she was very helpful. Unfortunately, our transfer attachment method failed despite all of her various attempts, and so if I get funding, I want to revisit that too. But we are kind of looking at that as well. Okay, so that's some ground lizards. Another project I'm looking at is how habitat fragmentation impacts the genetics of the tree frog found in Montserrat, which again has been, it's found on many islands, but its scientific name has been changed to now the Eleutherodactylus montserrati, because we believe that it originated in Montserrat. And I've had a couple of students who have done some really preliminary genetics work for their senior theses. So one did some sequencing of just cytochrome B to look at if there was differentiation, which there was a little, but not a ton. But we are hoping to do some more finer scale genetic work in the future. And then I had a student who went out and really increased our sample size and sampled across the island. So now I have lots of frog DNA samples that are in need of doing some work on them. So I'm hoping to develop that in the future, looking at how potentially this volcano has fragmented their populations. I guess I should say, I should show you in the aerial map, but there's a southern part of the island. So if you remember, the volcano right is about here. All of this is really heavily impacted, but there's the South Superior Hills, which is down here, really wasn't very impacted by the volcano, but it's really hard to get to. So the only way to get to it is to actually get there by boat. And there are hazards down there, there are wild dogs and things, so it's kind of dangerous. But I'm hoping eventually to get some samples down there because that's been isolated for a long period of time. So I'm curious to see if that has impacted any of these frogs, which are pretty widely distributed across the island. Another project I'm just starting to work on with Jenny Walk at Eastern Washington University is looking at disease ecology and in the frogs that are found on the island. So the mountain chicken frog, which is the one on the left, it's a really big frog. It was actually the apex predator in Montserrat, which is kind of funny to think about a frog being apex predator, but it's big and there are no native mammals other than bats. And so its habitat was heavily impacted by the volcano. It also was hunted. They're called mountain chicken frogs because people eat them. And then also chytrid fungus disease has kind of did them in as like kind of final straw. And so they are only found at this point on Dominica, which is an adjacent island in Montserrat, but they in the wild, they're now extricated from Montserrat. So the Jarrell Initiative has done some captive breeding of the frogs and has re-released them into pens, outdoor pens, but they're still in captive outdoor. And so they're still being monitored and they're still suffering from disease. So some work I'm trying to do with collaborators is look at what's going on with the other frog species that are on the island, which can serve as vectors for different fungal pathogens. And so we have the tree frog that I just talked about, and then we also have the cane toad. So they are introduced here too, but they're not as much of a problem in Montserrat. They have some impacts, but they are pretty pervasive. So we're trying to do some work with them. And then finally, as far as the herp world goes, we've also made some new observations of introduced species, including 2 species of parthenogenic reptiles. So all female populations of another Tiid, little guy, and then also a blind snake. And there's an endemic blind snake in Montserrat, which potentially this new introduced flower-clawed blind snake, which is found all over the world, could be a competitor for the native species, so that could have some serious conservation impacts. I also had a student make a novel observation of the endemic knoll lizard licking nectar from this introduced orchid species, which is kind of interesting. That hasn't been observed before in this species, and not only on one other orchid, so it's kind of neat. But it is a self-pollinating orchid, so it's probably not impacting their reproduction or anything, but it was just kind of a neat observation. So if you go out and you look, this island is pretty interesting because you can just see new things all the time. Okay, and then the last project that I'm working on or hoping to work on has to do with the impact of large introduced herbivores on primary succession processes. After the volcano, people had a lot of agricultural animals and they had to let them go because they're not getting what to do with them. So there are feral donkeys and cows and goats and chickens and probably other things I'm forgetting, but you see them a lot in the areas that are less inhabited by people. And so I'm curious how these animals might impact the natural ecological processes after you get new land formed. So I'm kind of interested in that. This is just to give you an idea. This is actually all this gray area. Those are new volcanic deposits that the coastline was not there before. So that it was from pyroclastic flow going out into the ocean. And that's a picture of the habitat in 2017. Here it is in 2024. So you can see that there's been a lot of growth of plants happening just between 2017 and 2024. So that's before, that's after, but there's still places that haven't been colonized yet by plants. And then this is the capital Plymouth. Again, this is just the building looking at in 2016. There's some, there's some plants that have colonized, but there it is in 2023. So we're seeing this process of new plants growing and coming in right in real time, which is pretty neat. And so my goal is really to establish permanent plots in the on the newly formed land and make some fence them off to exclude herbivores so that we can have kind of two treatments to look at the impact of herbivores on plant colonization and also animal colonization like insects and vertebrates. So we've started this, but it's a really long process trying to get everyone to say yes to putting permanent plots into this off limits area. So it's kind of a place that I'm hoping to make some progress and develop. Okay, and then just to highlight a couple things from other people I work with. Dr. Donald McClelland is a botanist at Emory University, and he's working on a complete flora of Montserrat. He has a website where he's documenting all of the plants. I had in my notes how many, but 1,000 something plants he's collected, or species he's collected. And we had some really hardworking undergraduates who did some pretty impressive undergraduate senior theses. Julia De Janeiro studied the Phoboidae family in Montserrat, and then Sophie Salisbury is looking at lichens in Montserrat and how they differ in different habitats by type. We also had a student, Coco Deng, who looked at pollination in two plant species, the Lobelia and the Myconia. She put camera traps out, and she also went out and did lots of observations. And she found several different pollinators of these plants, including several species of birds, which are Lesser Antillean endemics. The endemic oriole was also pollinating the bird, that's in the bottom. And then kind of neat, she found a rat that was pollinating the flowers as well. And then she looked at the nectar composition of those plants and found it was bat pollinated. She made some observations of bats, but wasn't able to confirm any pollination from her cameras. And then I think finally, I have some colleagues who do work with mollusks and fish. They've discovered several new species of fish in the freshwater systems. I think that's a mountain mullet, and also are looking at decapods in this system. And we have one student who did a pretty thorough inventory of all the different land snails on the island. And most recently, they have confirmed that the vector for schistosomiasis, the snail that serves as the intermediate host for the schistosomiasis parasite in humans, has been found in Montserrat. They thought it was eradicated during the volcano, but it actually is still there. So that has some implications for human health too. So work that's still being kind of investigated. Okay. I think I'm good on time. All right, last question. All right, so the whole thing about the field station, which was the title of my talk. Okay, so as we were taking students down to Montserrat, logistically, this is kind of hard, right? The only housing, so remember this is a small island, the only housing is there's one hotel, and they're vacation villas, and they're lovely. They have pools, and they're really nice, but they're also really expensive. And it's not the most economical way to house students. So we would have to rent 3 or so of these villas and then cook in one of them and bring all the students places. And so it was not an easy an easy way to do it. We also didn't have really lab facilities or anywhere to store our equipment. All I wanted was a closet, because every time we had to lug all of our stuff down and lug all of our stuff back on flights, and so it was really difficult. And like I said, we're cooking in these small kitchens. There really wasn't a great dining facility. So what we really wanted was all of these things kind of in one location that we could use for both our program and also for other visiting researchers or other student groups that were coming to the island. So kind of condensing this down, this was a much bigger headache than it seems. It's like, oh, this all happened, but it was really pretty challenging. First, we had to find a property that was challenging in and of itself, that was for sale. Most of the property in Montserrat gets handed down from generation to generation, so it's really hard to get hands on a property and one that's zoned for doing this type of thing. But we found a restaurant, a former restaurant, that consisted of basically three buildings. It was in really rough shape, but it was for sale. And decided that that was probably the best arrangement, because we could have one building that was the kind of headquarters, one building that was a dormitory, and one building that was a faculty kind of housing situation. And so we found it, and we also had to find a donor, which was probably the hardest. Interestingly, we found someone with a connection to both the university and had gone to Montserrat to do archaeological work, I don't know, 40 years ago. And so she was really excited about this project, and she was a local to our area. And so she donated the money to purchase and renovate the property. And then we also had to work with local partners. So Liston Scarrett is a local who is really interested in bringing more educational opportunities to the island, because there aren't that many for people there. And so we worked closely with him to get through all like the government red tape and everything to be able to do this. And so I'm not sure if you can tell from this picture, but this is looking out kind of the veranda of the field station. And it's pretty neat because on one side you can see where the clouds are, that's the volcano. So you can actually see the volcano from the field station. And on the other side, you can see the ocean. So it's a nice little walk to the beach, so students can go swimming whenever they want, which is nice because we don't have a pool, unfortunately, at this one. And then there were lots of renovations. I mean, this building didn't have a roof, so it was in pretty rough shape. There were bats living in them. They had no roofs. They were falling apart. So we really gutted the buildings and started almost from scratch. And because it's a really small island, all of your materials have to get there. And so we had to ship everything down in containers from the US. So that was a huge project in and of itself. So like thousands and thousands of nails. Actually, another thing that's really cool is on our campus, we had an oak tree that was just kind of like a historic sentimental oak tree that fell over in a storm. So we actually had the wood milled by a local, I don't know, woodsman person, a woodworker. And we sent that down, and then we had some people in Montserrat turn them into like our tables and benches for us. So we brought a little bit of Massachusetts down to Montserrat, but it was a pretty big endeavor. And it took a couple years. And then finally, we had a field station, which I never believed would really happen, actually, but it did. So I was really impressed. And it's a really great facility now for both education and research. We have, I don't have a ton of internal pictures of this, but we have an apartment style house that houses 5 to 6 people. And then we now have dormitory housing for 12 to 14 with like multiple bathrooms. And so it was really great. We used it for the first time this past year. So it's kind of a very new thing for us, but it totally changed the way we did the program, and it made it really feasible to take students down there and a lot easier. We have a classroom space with a projector and tables. We have an indoor outdoor dining area that's really nice. We have a commercial kitchen now, and we hired a full-time cook, which we were cooking for the students in doing all the grocery shopping. So that was like an amazing development. And then we also have, you can't really see it, but in the basement, we have lab facilities, and I have a closet, which is great, and just shelves. So I can leave my stuff there. So that is a really nice addition. And so now we're bringing our students down there and we're actually renting it out to other groups. So we just had a middle school come down and we had another group from New York City come down. And so we're currently renting it out to other groups. And we're hoping to get more researchers to come down as well to do work there because there's still so much yet to discover. So if you are interested in going to Montserrat, you can always email our director, who is Tom Coote, his email, but if you want, I can always give it to you. And we're actually not gonna do it, but there's a video. We're now developing promotional material too, so that we can advertise this to other people and get them interested as well. And with that, I think that's it. So happy to take any questions you might have.
Question, gentlemen?
So you said the most recent volcanic eruption was in 95?
Yeah, it started in 95, yeah.
But when was when was the first field station first started?
So we started going down as a group in volcanic eruption was 95, and then the last real big one was 2010. We started going down about 2013, 14 students. The field station being completed was 2020, just this year. We went down January, yeah.
So before the eruption, was there much sort of baseline survey work on that?
There was a bit. Most of it came from, there was a medical university in the capital, and so a lot of it came from people who were at the medical university doing side things. Some of it, like I do a little bit of butterfly work, and so there were some surveys that were done at that time from medical students who were just, their advisors said, go do this. There was some, but I know with the botanical work, there were a few people that came down, some in the 70s that did some botanical work. There was one guy who did a decent amount, but there wasn't that much baseline data. There was an herbarium in the Capitol, but it was destroyed during the volcano. So I mean, there was a little bit, but not a ton. Yeah. And there's a person who actually there's another person who studies bats who's been doing bat work down there since well before the volcano. So he has a long-term data set of bat work, and I'm sure there are other people that I'm forgetting, but yeah.
Yeah, the seas around Montserrat are pretty deep, presumably, being volcano. So there was no time during the last ice age or previous ice ages where it would have all been, above sea level. So the endemic species that you've got on, because I noticed one of the names there is Montserrat, so therefore then it's not a subspecies.
Yeah.
So they've been isolated a bloody long time to become different species. So each of the islands there then have their own of the same species.
Oftentimes, yeah.
Yeah, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah.
A bit like the Galapagos Islands.
Yeah, yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
You always sort of wonder, well, how the hell did they get between, one and another, So what age is these islands? They're about.
So I know I'm so bad at, my partner's a geologist, so he'll kill me, but Montserrat's 2 million years old.
Only 2 million.
Yeah, and then I don't know when all the different, but I guess that would give you a baseline of about when these different places, yeah.
We think the rats, the native rodents in Australia came about 2 million years ago, and you can see look at the expansion of, about 4 different species. So, it's interesting. So you don't know whether the lizards are definitely different from other lizards on other islands. See?
I mean, people have done, I would say the genetics of among the islands of different species has been more explored probably for that reason than other things. So for instance, the ground lizard, you will find definitely different, and people have done the genetic analysis, and there are definitely different species on different islands. And sometimes you find on bigger islands, following the guy in biogeography, you will find multiple, Knolls is like a classic example. You find, on the bigger, greater insulation, you have several species of Knolls. On Montserrat, you only have one species. So they definitely do. But then some things like the tree frogs, they thought that all the islands had that same one species of tree frog that was ubiquitous, but they've now, some people split it into two, and now, yeah, but I mean, check back. Yeah.
Just a subsequent question, how close is the island to Pele where the big volcano was in about 1900? Is that completely different? It's a
No.
completely different island. isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not, it's, I guess we'll go really far back. Like, that's in Martinique. Let's see if there's a map. Sorry, I'm just way back there. But all of these have had active volcanoes at different times. But there may be a couple that are like a little bit. But like in Antigua, which is the closest island, it hasn't been volcanic for a really long time. It's super flat. So if you look, some of them are much, you can kind of tell by how much erosion has happened, how old they are, or how old the volcano is.
So they're a couple of 100 kilometers apart, if not more.
Yeah, they're far. They're far apart. I don't know how far, but they're far. There's no scale there, but it's far. Yeah.
Is there any research interest from locals on the island that want to do?
Yeah,
Stuff?
yeah. So we have several people, partners with, who work for the Department of the Environment, who are working kind of with us. There hasn't been a lot of the snail work done, and so they're really interested in working with us to do some of the freshwater system surveys. It's interesting, the person who's currently the director of the volcano observatory, he actually is a Montserratian. So a lot of people who, you know, go on to be academics or like professional type jobs, they leave and they go to university or actually like even, I don't know, secondary school, college, whatever, in like Britain or somewhere. And then I think there's an interest in having them come back. But oftentimes, of course, they leave and then they never come back, but they are having some success. Azure May, who was the person I showed on that picture, she's working for the Department of the Environment. She went to England, got her master's, and has come back to work at the Department of the Environment. So we're seeing, I think, more of local people getting involved with that. As far as like just doing the survey work, I mean, the other thing is there's like no funding, right, for any of this. So I think they're as happy to get us to do as much of the work. But we have worked with schools too, like with like gone into local schools and done work with them too, with like younger kids and stuff.
So of the 10,000 people that left, where did they mostly end up?
I think a lot went to England. I mean, there's like a diaspora everywhere. I mean, I was in Toronto and they're like in their parade, they have a Montserrat I mean, so people have gone all over. I mean, I think a lot of English speaking places because they were British colony, but yeah. And sometimes they come back. So for St. Patrick's Day, since that's the big event, there are some people that, you know, still family there, and then they'll come back for St. Patrick's Day, and the island will like grow by I don't know how much, but it is significant. Also falls during our spring break, which is inconvenient because it's hard to get plane tickets and like housing because everyone's coming back for the celebration. Yeah. So
Just to follow up to that, so the volcano erupted in 95.
Mhm.
When was the exclusion zone like, I guess, when did that start? So did it erupt and everyone left, or was it after a few years where it got worse?
Yeah, so I mean, in the first year, so they created the zones pretty soon after, and there were a few different zones. There's a zone that just has always been off limits. There are a couple of zones that had been, you can only go in there during the daytime, that are now fully like accessible at any time. So they increased the border a little bit over time, but it was inaccessible for so long. Everyone who had a house there, it got abandoned. And it's like, so people left, I would say, in the first like year or something, because the other problem was there were no since they had to go to the northern part of the island, they're staying in shelters, they don't have a house, they don't have a place to send their kids to school, they can't, so most of the people were like, we need to leave because there are no facilities and like infrastructure to deal with it. Yeah, so I think most of them left during the first year or so that it was happening. But they were able to evacuate people, and not, I should have said this, but I think it was 19 people were killed at one point. They were farmers who were in an area that I think they shouldn't have been in. But I mean, that was pretty early on, but they were able to get everybody out in time before it was actually taken.
Is it a British protectorate or is it still run from Great Britain, the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, they have their own, they have a government system there, but it's overseen all by the British.
They do any feral animal culling?
That is something that they really wanna do more of. It's really hard to get guns in Montserrat, actually, and ammunition. And so, they have done some, but they don't have the funding or means, I think, to get the, like, supplies and to be able to do as much as they would like to. They do a little bit, they did do a rat eradication program at one point, which I think was sort of successful, but they couldn't keep it going. And so, yeah, the feral animals are definitely an area where they really are concerned about and like help, unfortunately. Yeah.
There used to be native rats on many of the islands, which were as big as bloody rabbits. And of course, they just, did this island have any?
It had a rice, it used to become rice rat. It had a rice rat, I don't know how big it was. It's been extinct for a long time. And then now it's just introduced black and brown rats. And they're also introduced agouti from South America. Do you know agouti?
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So they have those, but they're all introduced. But there was a native rat, but I think it's been gone for a long time, and I don't
They
know.
look like rabbits, they were.
Yeah, maybe it was. I don't know, but yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
are there any other research stations around?
Oh,
Like
it's a
any of
good
the other
question.
islands?
Yeah, there is one on, I should know this. There is one being, oh gosh, this is bad, I don't remember. There's one being run by another, like a big university that you would have heard of. And I can't remember, on one of the other islands. If you go for like the Organization for Field Studies, or like thing, you can look it up. But there are, but nothing really close by, and there aren't a ton actually. So I think this probably, it's not like we're unique, but there aren't, it's not like every island has a field station. There are a few. It is hard to get from different islands too. So the way we have to get there is we fly from the US, you have to fly to oops, oh my gosh, I messed this up.
Well, that's all right.
Okay. Fly to Antigua. And then you used to be able to get a ferry to Montserrat, but that got shut down during COVID and I don't know, they're always saying it's gonna restart, who knows? Or you take a small, like, 6-passenger plane over to Montserrat. And from Montserrat, the only place you can get really is Antigua. I went to Nevis during my sabbatical because they had like a one-time ferry thing, which was exciting, but generally you can't really get there easily from anywhere else.
Seems really remote.
Yeah, I mean, it's remote, but you can, from Montserrat, you can see on a clear day, you can see Antigua. So I mean, it's not that far, but it is, yeah, it is kind of off by its, definitely off by itself. And there aren't a lot, and because everything has to be shipped in, I mean, like, it's always hit or miss what you can actually buy there. There's not really too many stores.
Is the volcano still active or has it gone to sleep?
It's still active. It's not like active, it's not active like exploding,
But it's
but
still
it's
got gas.
still, yeah, the gases are coming out. There's still like earthquakes all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but you can't really feel, I mean, not big earthquakes, but little.
And who's actually looking at that, the volcano? Is that
That's-
British? That's a British,
Yeah. So that's the Montserrat Volcano Observatory. It is, you know, I think it is I mean, I don't know. I guess it's the British Montserrat organization. There are a lot of people from there are a lot of British that work there, I think, in addition to some local people, that also work there, but yeah. And it's pretty, there's actually there's gonna be a conference this summer, 30-year anniversary of the volcano, a volcano conference, so I'm assuming there are gonna be researchers from other places.
Now, I think we've run out of
Yeah,
time for
yeah.
more questions. Thank you so much for coming in and giving a chat. I think I'll give another round of applause to Sarah. Everyone to join us in the top of Yellow 2 for morning tea. So if anyone would like to chat to Sarah more, please go for morning tea in the top of Yellow 2. And hopefully we'll see you guys in 2 weeks for the next one. Thank you very much.
How much fishing? Like, do Montserrat do much fishing, and like, are there boats there to like, if we want to get this out, or if we want to, you know, hire a person to like bring it
Sorta.
somewhere?
There are a few local fishermen, but it's nothing like commercial, it's all, you know, just fishermen guys. And you can, like, we had a student actually who was like a big fisher.
Yeah.
Who went to, who wanted to go out, like, if he hired
It's called a third lance.
guy, went out.
Very dangerous.
Really, they go to another island, I didn't really like that.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
And they
But you
introduced
still like get out.
mongoose.
But so
And the bunny